She was blind, abandoned, and sold for $5,000 by the only woman she trusted. What Emily Monroe didn't know was that the necklace she clung to held the secret to her stolen identity and the man who unknowingly broke her heart. This is a story of betrayal, redemption, and a love lost to lies, then found in the most dramatic way imaginable. You won't believe who she really is or how she takes her life back. Where are you watching from? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breathtaking story that could change the way you see everything. In the forgotten town of Willow Ridge, Oregon, where the fog rolled in thick each morning and pine trees whispered secrets only the wind could understand, lived a girl named Ella Monroe. At 22, Ella was a shadow drifting through a place that barely noticed her. The world had been nothing but darkness to her since she was 5 years old. A sudden fever had taken both her sight and her memories, leaving her trapped in a life that felt borrowed and blurry. Her hazel eyes, though hauntingly beautiful, saw nothing of the rusted picket fences, the fading storefronts, or the misty hills beyond the edge of town. She lived in a creaking house on the last road before the forest began, with a woman who called herself her aunt, but acted more like a warden. Debbie Monroe was a bitter relic of broken dreams and empty whiskey bottles, a woman who had once wanted something better for herself and got stuck raising a child she never asked for. To Debbie, Ella wasn't a niece, she was an obligation, a burden that sucked the air out of the house with every cautious step she took. She mocked Ella's blindness, resented her silence, and cursed the day she was dropped on her doorstep by a distant cousin who disappeared soon after. Ella, despite everything, never fought back. She had learned long ago that the world didn't listen to girls like her. She spent most days by the cracked front window, tracing the warm light of the sun across her fingertips, letting it anchor her to time and place. There were no photographs in the house, no family stories. Her life began and ended in that tiny town, in that decaying house, with that woman who never once said she loved her. The only thing Ella had ever truly claimed as hers was a small pendant necklace she wore tucked beneath her threadbare sweaters. It was a thin silver chain with two charms, one shaped like a sun, the other a crescent moon. She had no idea where it came from or who had given it to her. Debbie scoffed every time she touched it, calling it junk, but Ella didn't care. In her fingers it felt like more than metal. It felt like a promise. She often sat quietly, tracing the edges of the charms, as if willing them to whisper back the story they held. The townspeople pitied her. That was the worst part. Pity wrapped around her like an itchy blanket, uncomfortable and always present. They'd whisper as she walked past, tapping her cane along the uneven sidewalks, careful of cracks and puddles. "Poor girl," they'd mutter, blind and stuck with that old hag, but none of them ever stopped to ask how she was. Their compassion ended at the edge of gossip. One gray afternoon, with rain drumming against the roof and wind rattling the shutters, Debbie came home from the bar with a strange excitement in her voice. Ella heard her before she saw her, stumbling through the doorway with slurred words and a breath reeking of cheap gin. "I got you something," Debbie croaked. "Something that'll change your life." Ella stood still in the hallway, cautious. "What is it?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "A job. In New York. Some guy wants to help girls like you. He's offering $5,000 to get you started. Says you'll be taken care of." Alarm bells rang in Ella's chest, but she said nothing. Debbie kept talking, painting a picture of a better life of city lights, opportunity, freedom. It sounded too good to be true, but when Debbie shoved a small wad of bills into her purse and told Ella to pack, she obeyed. What choice did she have? She packed everything she owned in a single duffel bag. 2 worn sweaters, 1 pair of shoes, a notebook with blank pages, and her pendant. Her fingers closed around the sun and moon one last time before zipping it away. The next morning, they boarded a Greyhound bus, its windows fogged and cold. Ella sat by the window, listening to the hum of tires against rain. Slicked roads, her cane resting against her leg, her mind a storm of dread and quiet hope. She didn't know where she was going, only that it was far from Willow Ridge, and that, at least, was something. The city hit LA like a wave she hadn't braced for. Manhattan was a thunder of life horns blaring, strangers brushing past without a glance, the metallic scent of rain on concrete hanging in the air. She clung to her cane as the sounds overwhelmed her. Debbie gripped her arm with impatience, half dragging her through the revolving glass doors of a towering building that smelled of steel and polish. "This is it," Debbie muttered, not bothering to explain where they were. Her voice had shifted from coaxing to clipped, like she was finishing a transaction. Ella heard the rustle of papers, the crisp sound of bills changing hands, and then silence. When she turned, Debbie was already gone. Just like that. The marble floor beneath her shoes was slick, cold. She tapped her cane forward, uncertain. The lobby felt cavernous voices echoing, footsteps sharp like ice on glass. Ella stood alone, heart racing. She didn't know who to talk to, didn't know if she was expected. Her fingers gripped the strap of her bag so tightly, it hurt. The pendant beneath her sweater pulsed with warmth. Or maybe that was just her fear. Then came a voice smooth, measured, and unmistakably in control. "This is her?" it asked. A second, older voice answered, "Yes." The blind girl from Oregon. Ella turned instinctively toward them, though her world remained blank. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling. "Ms. Monroe," the man said, stepping closer. "Welcome to Drake Industries. I'm Colton Drake." His name meant nothing to her, but his tone did. It held weight, the kind that filled rooms. Colton sounded like a man used to being listened to. Ella offered a small nod. "I wasn't told much." He paused, then sighed as if this whole arrangement irritated him. "You'll be coming with me. My grandmother's instructions." Grandmother? Ella's confusion deepened. She thought she was here for a job. Some kind of caretaker role, maybe. Not whatever this was. She followed Colton's steps, her cane clicking softly beside his leather shoes. A car waited outside, its engine purring like a beast at rest. The driver opened the door without a word. The ride out of the city felt like slipping into another universe. The noise faded. The road stretched long and quiet. Ella kept her head turned toward the window, trying to anchor herself to the vibrations beneath the wheels. When the car finally stopped, Colton spoke again. "We're here." Here is a mansion, she could tell by the echo of her footsteps on the stone walkway, the size of the wooden doors that opened with a heavy groan, the cool hush of marble beneath her soles. She stepped inside and the air changed. It was colder, more watchful. She could feel it. An older woman's voice cut through the silence. "So, this is the girl." "Yes, Evelyn," Colton said with a sigh. "This is Ella Monroe." Evelyn Drake, the matriarch. Her voice was sharp, unwavering. She was born during the lunar eclipse, just like the prophecy said. The signs are all there. Prophecy? Ella flinched inwardly. People didn't live their lives by prophecies anymore, did they? "She doesn't look like much," Evelyn continued. "But she'll do. The family needs her." Colton said nothing. Ella stood still, her thoughts scrambling to catch up. Had she just been brought here because of a birth date? A coincidence? That night, in a guest room too large and too quiet, Ella sat on the edge of the bed, holding her pendant in shaking hands. She traced the sun and moon like she always did, searching for a truth she couldn't see. Something wasn't right. This wasn't a job. This wasn't kindness. She had been delivered, not hired. There were no interviews, no questions, just signatures and silence. She heard the creak of the hallway floors, distant voices murmuring things she couldn't make out. She wasn't part of this world. She didn't even know what this was, but it was clear now she hadn't been offered a new life. She'd been handed off, passed like an object between people who didn't care about her name, her thoughts, or her fears. And somewhere deep inside her, that fragile spark of hope she'd carried from Willow Ridge began to flicker, not out, but dangerously close. The wedding happened 3 days later, with the haste of a business deal and the warmth of an autopsy. Ella barely had time to process it. Evelyn called it fulfilling destiny, but to L.A. it felt like surrender. A borrowed gown was pressed into her hands, silk, stiff with starch, the hem too long. A maid she never met pinned her hair in silence. No one explained anything. No vows were rehearsed. No flowers were chosen. She was given instructions, and she followed them. The mansion's private chapel echoed with grandeur and emptiness. Ella stood at the altar, her hands trembling at her sides, gripping the cool silver of her pendant beneath her bodice. Her blind eyes stared ahead, unseeing, but her heart raced as if it could sense something was being taken from her. Colton stood beside her, stiff and distant. He didn't take her hand, didn't say a word until prompted by the officiant. Even then, his voice was flat, clipped, almost resentful. "I do," he said, like he was signing off on a merger. She repeated the same words, her voice small but clear. Then it was over. A kiss was never requested. Applause never came. Only Evelyn's satisfied hum and the rustle of chairs as a few guests rose, more interested in the canopies than the bride. That night, the air was thick with expectation. Evelyn made sure everything went according to tradition. Colton walked her to a lavish bedroom with walls so silent they rang. He didn't speak as he closed the door. He undid the buttons of his shirt methodically, without looking at her. Ella sat on the edge of the bed, spine rigid, heart pounding. When he touched her, it wasn't cruelty, but it wasn't tenderness either. It was obligation. Transaction. A chore to be crossed off a list. When it was over, he said nothing. He left her alone, the sheets still warm where he'd been. Ella curled into herself, her hands finding the pendant again, desperate for the smallest sense of familiarity. Tears leaked silently from her eyes as the truth bled in. She hadn't been rescued. She'd been sold, not for love, not for destiny, for money. For prophecy. For something she didn't believe in and hadn't asked for. Her body felt foreign. Her heart felt broken before it had ever been given a chance to grow. In the morning, the mansion hummed with cold civility. Staff passed her in the halls without speaking. Evelyn nodded at her once, approving, as if Ella were a puzzle piece she'd finally forced into place. Colton didn't look at her. He was gone before she woke, heading back to the city for work. Days blurred into each other, quiet meals eaten alone, endless rooms that meant nothing to her, the faint ticking of clocks too grand to chime. The whispers began almost immediately. The Drake family was old money sharp, polished, and merciless. To them, she was an outsider, a nobody from nowhere. "She's blind," someone muttered once as she passed. What kind of wife is that for Colton? He's probably ashamed of her. Can't even pick out her own clothes. She heard it all. She said nothing. Her cane became a symbol of their disdain. a mark of weakness, a reminder that she didn't belong. But Ella clung to her rhythm: tap, pause, step, tap, pause, step. Each room had its own breath, its own echo, and she was learning them. Not because she wanted to stay, but because she had to survive. She made mental maps of each hallway, memorized the slope of the stairs, the distance between chandeliers. Still, every night she returned to that lonely bed, tracing the sun and moon pendants, trying to remember who she'd once been. Somewhere in her body was a past she couldn't touch. Somewhere in her heart was a name that didn't feel like hers. She was a ghost in her own life. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Colton kept something of his own. Locked away in the drawer of his office desk in Manhattan, wrapped in cloth and memory, was a necklace. A single pendant, the sun, given to a girl he called Luna long ago, a promise made under a summer sky. And that girl, the one who had vanished after a childhood accident, wore its twin around her neck, blind to the truth but not for much longer. While Ella tried to find meaning in silence, someone else was watching the cracks form in her new, fragile world. Sierra Maddox, 30 floors above in her sleek glass office at Drake Industries, was already laying plans. With her auburn hair always curled to perfection and a wardrobe sharp enough to cut glass, Sierra was the kind of woman who commanded attention the moment she entered a room. She had clawed her way up the corporate ladder, charming and manipulating her way into Colton Drake's inner circle. But charm wasn't enough inner circle. But charm wasn't enough anymore. She wanted more his company, his legacy. To Sierra, Ella was a fluke. An obstacle. A blind, helpless placeholder in a role Sierra believed should have been hers. When she first heard about Colton's sudden marriage, she laughed. He married who? She had asked Gregory Kane, Colton's assistant, barely hiding her amusement. But when she saw Ella in person, quiet, blind, wandering the halls like a lost child, something else stirred inside her. Not sympathy. Not pity. Opportunity. She began paying closer attention, noticing the way Colton's gaze never lingered on his wife, how his jaw clenched when Evelyn's name was mentioned. He was unhappy, disconnected. Disconnected, still holding on to something. One night, working late under the hum of office lights, Sierra passed by Colton's door and overheard him talking to Gregory in a low, raw voice. She had this necklace, Colton murmured. Sun and moon pendants. I gave them to her. To Luna. We were kids. But I remember. I promised her forever. Sierra froze. A necklace. That night, curiosity bloomed into obsession. She needed to see that necklace, to know what had power over a man like Colton. The chance came days later. Ella was in the library, her favorite room in the mansion, though she couldn't read a single word. She ran her fingers across the spines, tracing faded leather and raised titles, building stories in her mind. When she reached for the edge of the table, her necklace slipped from beneath her collar. The chain caught on a drawer handle and snapped. She didn't even notice, not until she'd left. Sierra did. She entered minutes later to leave a report for Evelyn and spotted it on the floor, gleaming like a secret. Her breath hitched. She bent down, picked it up, and her eyes widened. There it was. The moon and the sun. Colton's memory made real. This is it, she whispered, her smile stretching slowly. She curled her fingers around the pendants as if they were keys to a kingdom. And in that moment, a new plan began to take shape, calculated, cruel, and brilliant. The next morning, she found Gregory near the elevators, holding his ever-present clipboard. "We need to talk," she said. Greg stiffened. "About what?" Luna. He paled slightly. "Why?" Sierra leaned in, her voice syrupy but sharp. "Because you're going to help me become her." Greg looked away. "That's insane." "I'm not asking," she said. "I'm offering. A future. One that doesn't involve you being Colton's underpaid errand boy forever." She dangled promises in front of him: money, promotion, a stake in what she called their future empire. Reluctantly, Greg caved. Over the next 2 weeks, he fed her every detail he knew, stories Colton had shared over the years: the lake, the summer games, the promise under the stars, a scar Luna got on her shoulder when she fell from a swing. Sierra absorbed it all. Then, one night, she took a coin, heated it with a lighter, and pressed it to her shoulder. The skin bubbled and screamed, but she didn't flinch. Pain was temporary. Power was forever. With her story rehearsed and her performance perfected, she slipped the necklace into her purse and walked into Colton's office just as the rain began to fall against the tall windows. He looked up, surprised.
"Sierra?"
I need to tell you something," she said, her voice catching just enough to seem genuine. She pulled the necklace from her bag and let it dangle between them. I think I'm Luna." Colton's eyes widened. His breath hitched. And just like that, Sierra Maddox became the ghost he'd been chasing his whole life. Colton stood frozen, the necklace swinging slowly between them like a metronome counting down the seconds to the unraveling of his world. His fingers twitched at his sides as his eyes locked onto the familiar sun and moon. For a moment, the silence was deafening. No rustling papers, no buzzing phones, just the pounding of his heart in his ears. "Where did you get that?" he finally asked, his voice low and strained. Sierra lowered her gaze, let her lip tremble ever so slightly. She whispered, "I didn't know what it meant until I heard you mention it that day. I didn't want to believe it, I thought. Maybe I was imagining things." But then the memories started coming back. Colton swallowed hard, blinking against the sudden swell of emotion that rose in his chest. "Memories?" he echoed, his voice nearly a whisper. She nodded, carefully choosing every word. "The lake. The swing set. You said, I fell and got this." She pulled down the collar of her blouse to reveal the fresh scar on her shoulder, still healing but perfectly placed. "You called me Luna." He stared at the scar as if it were a holy relic. "I did," he murmured, his voice breaking. Sierra stepped closer. "I didn't understand why everything felt so familiar, why you felt familiar, but now I do. It's you. It's always been you, Colton." It was the lie he wanted to believe. The hope he'd buried for so long clawed its way back to the surface, raw and bright. He reached out, almost hesitating, then gently closed his hand around the necklace. "I found you," he whispered, the words a mix of disbelief and relief. Sierra let him pull her into his arms, let herself be held like a lifeline, even as a triumphant smile curled beneath the tears she forced into her eyes. She had him. From that day on, Colton changed. His presence at home became rarer, his cold silence toward Ella now replaced with absence. If she heard his footsteps in the mansion at all, they were distant, fleeting. The man who once slept beside her without a word now didn't bother returning at all. When he did, he was distracted, gentler in tone, but unreachable. Ella noticed it all. She wasn't naive. She didn't need sight to sense the shift in air, the quiet hum of betrayal. Colton no longer asked how she was, no longer sat in the same room. And one morning, a voice she didn't recognize drifted through the halls, bright, smooth, and falsely sweet. Sierra, Sierra. Ella first heard her laughter echoing down the marble staircase, then her heels clicking like a warning bell, then her whispers, too low for most to catch. But Ella had sharp ears and sharper instincts. "She's a ghost in her own house," Sierra murmured to someone one evening, her voice barely a breath. "Blind and useless, a placeholder, nothing more." Ella clenched her fists, her cane trembling in her grip. But she didn't respond. Not yet. Worse still, Evelyn approved. She believed Sierra was truly Luna, and welcomed her like a granddaughter reborn. "She's brought a spark back into him," Evelyn told the staff. Something Ella never could. Ella became an afterthought, a shadow. Her meals were now sent to her room. Her place at the table was gone. The staff began treating her with quiet pity or awkward indifference, like they weren't sure if she still mattered. And then came the cruelty. It started small. A broken teacup left by her bedside. A misplaced chair that sent her stumbling. A lock jammed from the outside, keeping her trapped in a storage room for hours. Sierra always apologized sweetly in front of others, but when they were alone, her words cut like knives. "You're just a ghost with a pretty trinket," she whispered once. "No one sees you. No one wants to." But Ella clutched her pendant, the moon warm against her skin. She said nothing. Not yet. Let Sierra play her game. Let Sierra play her game. Let Colton chase the lie. The truth had a way of clawing its way into the light, and Ella had already lived through darkness. She knew how to wait. Ella sat alone in the garden room, its once sweet scent of roses now tinged with mildew and disuse. The house was quieter these days, but not in the peaceful way quiet like a grave, as if it had already buried her. The walls no longer whispered. They sighed with weariness. Her world had become narrower with each passing day, shrinking down to carefully measured steps and the haunting sound of Sierra's laughter echoing through halls that used to belong to her, even if only by name. But something unexpected had stirred within her, something small and miraculous. It began with a flutter soft, deep within her, barely more than a ripple, but undeniable. At first, she thought it was her imagination. But then came the nausea, the strange pull in her body, the aching tenderness. She didn't need a doctor to tell her what it was. She was pregnant. A baby. Life in the midst so much sorrow. Ella pressed both hands to her stomach, feeling a warmth she hadn't known in months. Her lips trembled as a quiet sob escaped, not from fear, but from fragile, glowing hope. Maybe this was her reason. Maybe this child was the new beginning she hadn't dared believe in. She didn't know how or when, or even why, but she knew this child would be loved. By her, if no one else. She kept the secret close, like a tiny ember in her chest. She smiled again, softly, when no one was looking. She hummed in the shower. She held her pendant with both hands and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." But Sierra noticed. Of course she did. She watched Ella with narrowed eyes, sensed the change in her posture, the soft touch she gave her belly. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. And Sierra wouldn't allow it. Not now. Not when she had Colton wrapped around her finger, not when Evelyn had practically declared her the family savior. So she plotted. The opportunity came one evening at a private dinner. Just a few family members and staff, seated around the long mahogany table in a room that smelled like wax and cold meat. Ella had been invited out of formality, but was seated at the far end, away from Colton, away from Sierra. She had barely touched her food, stomach turning with unease. Her cane rested at her side, her hands folded in her lap. When she stood to excuse herself, the table fell momentarily quiet, only the clinking of forks and soft murmur of conversation filling the space. And then swift, cruel, deliberate Sierra stuck out her foot. Ella's cane caught awkwardly. Her balance tipped. Time slowed. He looked up slowly. His face didn't register surprise, only exhaustion. "No," he said. Ella's breath hitched. "No. You're my wife. By law," he said coldly. "Live with it." Her hands clenched into fists, her cane quivering where it stood beside her. "You don't love me. You never did." He didn't deny it. "You let her, Sierra, hurt me," she said, her voice cracking now. "You believed her over me. You stood by and watched me disappear." Colton glanced back down at the folder as if the conversation bored him. "You'll be taken care of." Ella laughed, a bitter, breathless sound. "I don't need to be taken care of, Colton. I need to be free." But he didn't respond, just turned another page. She left before the scream in her throat became too loud to swallow. That night, locked in her room once again, the silence pressed in like a second skin. She sat on the floor by her bed, clutching her necklace in her palm. The pendants, the sun, and the moon felt warm against her skin, as if reminding her of something just out of reach. A name, a promise, a childhood that hadn't been stolen by fever or distance, but by people who refused to see her. And that's when the knock came. Not a harsh pound, not Sierra's sneering voice, or Debbie's reeking insults from the past, but a soft, careful knock. Then the door creaked open. "Ms. Monroe?" a gentle female voice called. "My name is Sarah." "Sarah, I'm with an organization called Lost and Found." Ella didn't move at first. Then she stood, her cane tapping once on the floor. "Yes," she whispered. Sarah entered, followed by a second person who remained silent near the door. The woman had a calming presence, her words slow and deliberate, as if trying not to shatter the already broken figure before her. "We've been looking for someone for a long time," Sarah began. "A girl who disappeared 20 years ago from a fair in Los Angeles. She was just 2 years old. Her name was Emily Monroe, your birth name." Ella frowned, confused. "I don't remember anything before I was 5. I know. You had a high fever. It caused memory loss. And you lost your vision." Sarah's voice softened. "We believe you're Emily." Ella's breath caught. "We found a match through a volunteer who remembered a blind girl in Oregon. A necklace she always wore. Sun and moon pendants. The same ones you're holding now." Ella's hands trembled around the necklace. "This belonged to my real family?" Sarah nodded. "Your father never stopped looking. His name is Arthur Monroe. He's one of the most prominent media executives in the country. He's been funding Lost and Found for years, hoping to find you." Ella swayed where she stood, suddenly unsteady. He's waiting to meet you. You want." She couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. Within 48 hours, she was on a private jet bound for Los Angeles. The skies were clear, the cabin quiet. Sarah sat beside her, offering comfort in silence. For the first time in her life, Ella felt like someone was guiding her without expecting her to follow blindly. When the plane landed, a car took them to a gated estate wrapped in white stone and sunlit ivy. The doors opened, and Arthur Monroe stood on the steps, silver-haired, his eyes shining with tears. The moment she stepped out, he whispered, "Emily." Ella nodded, unable to say a word. He took her into his arms, trembling as he held her close. "I never stopped looking," he choked out. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel lost. She felt found. Ella woke in a white room that smelled of clean linen and lavender oil, her heartbeat matching the steady beep of the monitor beside her bed. The sunlight pouring through the wide windows felt different, here warmer, bolder, like it belonged to a life she had never known. The Langley estate in Beverly Hills was the kind of place she had only imagined in books, all grand staircases and echoing marble, but none of that felt as surreal as the man who sat at her bedside every morning, eyes full of hope and years of sorrow. Arthur Monroe, her father. She still struggled to believe it. That she was Emily Monroe. That she had once been a toddler in a yellow sundress, laughing at a crowded fair only to vanish in the chaos. That a fever had stolen her sight and her past. That someone, somewhere, had decided to hide her away in Willow Ridge, to erase her from a world that had been searching desperately to bring her home. But the necklace, the sun and moon, had never lied. Arthur held her hand gently as the ophthalmology team entered her room that morning. He had flown in specialists from Switzerland, Tokyo, and Boston, some of the best minds in the world, determined to give his daughter the gift of sight again. Ella had tried to protest at first, afraid of hoping for too much, but he had looked at her with a softness that melted her doubt. "You deserve to see the world, Emily," he'd said. "You deserve to see yourself." So she agreed. The surgery lasted 3 hours. She remembered nothing but the antiseptic air, the hushed tones of the doctors, and the silent squeeze of her father's hand before they wheeled her in. When she woke, her face was wrapped in gauze, her world still dark, but this time it felt like a pause, not a sentence. 2 days passed. And then, finally, they unwrapped her eyes. The first thing she saw was a soft blur of golden light, painfully bright but beautiful. She blinked, tears rushing down before the image sharpened. Her father's face appeared in front of her, lined with age, but unmistakably kind. His gray eyes were wet. "Hi, baby girl," he whispered. Ella gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth. "I see you," she choked out, sobbing. Arthur pulled her into a gentle hug, his body shaking with relief. "You're home," he said, "and you're safe." The world came alive around her, like a painting being filled in for the first time. She saw the soft blue of the curtains, the shimmer of her pendant in the sunlight, the trembling joy in the staff who had cared for her. It was overwhelming, but it was real. Over the next few days, Arthur reintroduced her to the life she had been taken from. He showed her photographs of her mother, who had passed years earlier, smiling in every frame. Her childhood bedroom, still preserved like a shrine. Video clips of her as a toddler, laughing and running through sprinklers. It was all so much, so sudden, and yet every piece fit. And in all of it, she never once heard the name Ella. She was Emily now, Emily Monroe, a name that belonged to love, not pity. To a future, not a cage. But as the joy settled into her bones, another truth began to form. She couldn't stay hidden here forever. Arthur sensed it before she spoke. One morning over breakfast on the veranda, he slid a folder across the table. "I want you to take over our New York division," he said, his tone calm but certain. Emily blinked. "What?" You're smart, resilient, and no one knows that city better than someone who survived the worst of it, he said. You don't need to be a victim anymore. You can lead. The thought terrified her but also thrilled her. She opened the folder. Inside were blueprints, forecasts, strategic plans, and a photo of the Manhattan skyline. It was a second chance. A chance not just to reclaim her name, but her power. She looked up at her father, his expression filled with nothing but pride. I don't know if I'm ready, she whispered. You don't have to be, he said. You just have to try. And so, with the sun gleaming off the necklace that had brought her home, Emily Monroe packed her bags once more. But this time, she didn't leave as a girl searching for a way out. She returned as a woman stepping into her place in the world, eyes open, hard-armored, and ready to rewrite the story that had nearly destroyed her. The return to New York wasn't triumphant. Not at first. The skyline shimmered like a blade, sharp and dazzling, but Emily Monroe, no longer Ella, stepped off the private jet with steady breath and quiet resolve. She wore a sleek black coat, her hazel eyes now wide and alert, no longer clouded by shadows. Beside her sat Sarah, the woman from Lost and Found who had become something of a guardian angel. But this time, Emily didn't need saving. She had come to do the saving herself. The Langley Media Nicey branch office stood like a monolith in the heart of Manhattan, all glass and pride. Her name was already being whispered in boardrooms, some with awe, others with caution. A girl who had vanished 20 years ago was now CEO. A girl once blind now saw more clearly than the men who'd ruled that skyline for decades. But before she could settle into her new role, Emily had unfinished business. Margaret, her so-called Aunt Debbie, had slithered back into her life the moment the news broke. The woman arrived at Langley headquarters, wearing cheap perfume and a silk scarf 2 decades too young for her, demanding to see L.A. Emily let her wait 2 hours before summoning her into the penthouse office. Margaret's eyes flicked around the room greedily. Look at you, she sneered. All grown up. Living large. I always said you had potential. Emily didn't flinch. She sat behind a white marble desk, sunlight haloing her face. She didn't need to raise her voice. You sold me for $5,000. Debbie stiffened. Now, hold on. You stood at that lobby and walked away without even saying goodbye, Emily continued, her voice calm as still water. You let a stranger take me. You let a stranger take me. You lied to me about who I was, for years. Debbie tried to laugh it off, but the sound was brittle. I gave you a roof. Food. You're welcome for that. Emily rose slowly from her chair. You gave me chains and called it shelter. You gave me silence and called it peace. She walked around the desk, stopping inches from the woman who had shaped her childhood with cruelty. You have no claim here, she said, her voice like ice. Not to me, not to my name, not to my name, not to a single cent of my father's money. Margaret's face crumpled. You can't. I just did. Security showed her out. It was the first of many doors Emily would close. The next door led to the Sullivan family. She didn't bother announcing her presence. Instead, she attended a charity gala hosted by Langley Media, held in a glass ballroom suspended above the Hudson. Every influential name in the city was there, including Colton Drake. He arrived with Sierra on his arm, dressed in midnight blue, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. Colton's eyes scanned the room, distant and tired, until they landed on Emily. He froze. She stood beneath a crystal chandelier, a sapphire gown hugging her like truth itself. Her hazel eyes open now met his, and something flickered in his face. Recognition, shame, memory. Sierra's grip on his arm tightened. Emily didn't flinch. She walked toward them slowly, her heels silent against the polished floor. "Hello, Sierra," she said first, her voice cool. Sierra smirked. "Well, well, look who got an upgrade." "I see you're still playing dress-up," Emily replied. Colton stepped between them, but Emily's gaze shifted to him. "You don't know me," she said, and the words were both a warning and a promise. "But you will." She turned and walked away, her pendant catching the light as it swung against her chest. Behind her, Sierra hissed something venomous under her breath. Emily didn't care. The past was no longer chasing her. She was chasing it. That night, as she stared out at the city from her penthouse window, her father called. "I saw the photos," Arthur said. "You look like your mother." Emily smiled faintly. "Thank you for believing in me." "You're my daughter," he replied. "No one can take that from you." She touched her necklace, her fingers brushing the sun and moon pendants. The same necklace that had once been her only lifeline was now her compass. It had brought her here to this moment, this strength, this power, and she would not waste it. The unraveling began with a single slip. It was late one evening, and the city beyond the penthouse windows pulsed with golden light. Inside, Colton sat beside Sierra in the den of his Manhattan condo, sipping whiskey and listening absently as she recounted once again the summer days they supposedly spent as children. She spoke of fireflies and tire swings, her voice soft and nostalgic, her hand resting gently on his knee. "And then," she said with a little laugh, "you caught a firefly in that glass jar and put it on the porch railing, remember?" Colton froze. A memory stirred sharp and unyielding.
We are sad.
Sierra blinked, her smile faltering for a split second. "Oh." But Colton's expression had already changed. Something shifted behind his eyes like a curtain lifting. Later that night, long after Sierra had curled into his side and pretended to sleep, Colton stood by the window, gripping a glass of untouched scotch. His mind churned. The detail had been so small, but it had landed like a shard of glass. He couldn't stop thinking about it, about how Sierra's stories had always been just close enough to real but never quite right. The next morning, he summoned Gregory Kane to his office. Greg entered slowly, his eyes flicking towards Sierra's name on the visitor log, before settling on Colton's tight expression. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Colton asked. Greg shifted uncomfortably. "About what?" "You know what?" Greg hesitated, his fingers tightening around the file in his hands. I don't know what you mean, sir." Colton's jaw clenched. That's not a good answer. But Gregory wouldn't say more, not yet. As doubt clawed at Colton's mind, another storm gathered on the horizon. Derek Vaughn, a rival real estate mogul with a razor smile and a thirst for power, had begun quietly buying up Sullivan Enterprises stock, launching a campaign of whispered rumors and sudden boardroom upheaval. Their empire was crumbling from within. And Sierra, she was fueling it. What Colton didn't know yet was that Sierra had been feeding Derek confidential data for weeks, hoping to collapse the company and pick up the pieces for herself. In her mind, Colton would be vulnerable, desperate, and hers. Meanwhile, across the city, Emily Monroe was solidifying her place as CEO of Langley Media's New York branch. She dove into work with fierce precision, orchestrating high-level meetings and media partnerships that turned heads throughout the industry. Her reputation wasn't just built on her name anymore, it was built on her brilliance. Her father, Arthur, watched her with pride, never interfering, always supporting. And one evening, as they sat beneath the soft light of his Beverly Hills study, he handed her a folder with a simple nod. "I want you to lead the signing event," he said. "Langley and Vaughn joint press conference. You'll be the face of it." Emily's fingers tightened slightly. "Vaughn?" "Yes, I know what you're thinking, but it's just business. You'll handle it beautifully." She agreed, though something in her stomach twisted. Back in Manhattan, Sierra's hold on Colton was slipping. Her stories began to contradict themselves, and her anger flared when he questioned her. "Why don't you trust me?" she snapped one morning, her voice sharper than usual. "After everything we've shared." "I don't know what we've shared," he said, staring her down. "I don't know who you really are." She stormed out. Gregory watched it all from the sidelines, his guilt growing like mold. And then fate struck. A car accident. Gregory was hit by a reckless driver on a rainy Tuesday. He survived, but not without bruises, a broken arm, and a concussion. Yet even through the haze of pain, he knew what he had to do. At the Langley Vaughn signing ceremony, held in a glittering ballroom atop a Manhattan skyscraper, Emily stood on stage in a sapphire suit that shimmered like midnight. The city sparkled behind her. Derek Vaughn grinned like a man who'd already won. Then the doors burst open. Gasps filled the room as Gregory Kane stumbled and bloodied pale, barely upright. "She lied," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Sierra.
She's not Luna. She stole that necklace from Emily. I helped her fake everything.
The room erupted into chaos. Colton turned to Sierra, who stood frozen. "Is it true?" Before she could answer, Greg said the final words that shattered all. "She killed Evelyn. I saw her swap the pills." And just like that, the lie collapsed. Everything Sierra had built turned to ash in her hands, and Emily, watching from the podium, felt her heart hammer against her ribs. The reckoning had begun. The room fractured into sound gasps, murmurs, the clatter of glasses hitting marble floors as Sierra's mask finally slipped. Colton stared at her, his face pale and unreadable, his hands fisted at his sides. Sierra, once so poised and cunning, was trembling now, her lips parting as if to speak, but no lie would come. Gregory stood swaying in the ballroom light, his suit bloodied, his eyes wild with adrenaline and guilt. "She poisoned Evelyn," he repeated. "I saw her do it. She said the old woman would never let her keep control." Sierra snapped out of her stupor, lunging forward. "He's delusional," she cried. "He's obsessed with me. He made all this up." But Colton stepped back from her, as if her touch might burn. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice low, guttural. She hesitated for one breath too long. That was all it took. The room shifted. People backed away. Security guards appeared at the edges of the crowd, closing in like shadows. Sierra's composure cracked. She spun toward Emily, her eyes venomous. "You think you've won?" she snarled. "You blind little brat, you don't deserve him. You are nothing. I gave him a reason to believe again." Emily's face remained calm, but her hand instinctively moved to her pendant, the sun and moon resting just above her heart. "You stole a life that wasn't yours," she said softly, "and you turned it into poison." With a scream, Sierra tried to flee. She shoved past a waiter, knocking over a tray of champagne, her heels clacking frantically across the marble as security surged forward. But before they could reach her, a voice crackled through the earpieces of the guards near the back entrance. "She's not alone," one whispered. Derek Vaughn's in on it. They've been working together for weeks. Just as Sierra reached the doors, Derek appeared, trying to slip out through the side hallway. But he wasn't fast enough. One of the guards caught him by the collar, wrenching him backward, and the moment he saw Sierra struggling against the others, his face turned to stone. "You idiot," he hissed at her. "You dragged us both down." "You promised I'd have everything," she shrieked. "You said we'd take them down." Colton stood frozen at the edge of the chaos, his world cracking open piece by piece. The woman he thought was Luna, the woman he'd trusted, was a fraud. And Evelyn. His grandmother had died, believing in a lie. Gregory was helped to a seat, medics tending to his bruised face and fractured wrist. The crowd began to thin, murmuring in disbelief as security led Sierra and Derek away in cuffs. Only Emily remained still, her eyes locked on Colton, whose shoulders slumped with the weight of betrayal. He turned to her slowly, pain etched deep into his features. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "I swear to you, Emily. I didn't know." She nodded once, expression unreadable. He stepped closer, reaching into his pocket with shaking fingers. From inside, he pulled a folded, crumpled envelope. This was Evelyn's last letter. "I never read it until today." His voice broke. She knew. He unfolded it and handed it to her. Emily took the letter with careful hands and read the trembling cursive aloud. "Claire is your salvation. Don't let her go. The girl with the pendant. She's the one. She always was." Her breath caught. Colton's voice cracked as he whispered, "I think you're Luna. I think I've always known. But I was too blind to see it." Emily swallowed hard, her heart a thunderclap against her ribs. The pendant felt hot against her skin. "You let me go," she said, her voice shaking. "You let me go," she said, her voice shaking. "You let them hurt me. You believed her when I was begging you." He sank to his knees, right there on the ballroom floor, in front of everyone. "I was weak. I was grieving. I was wrong," he said. "But if you give me one chance, just one, I'll spend my life making it right." Before she could answer, a staff member rushed forward, breathless. "Ms. Monroe, there's something else." Sierra left a note. "For you." Emily took it and read the single line scrawled in red ink. "If you want to end this, meet me where it began. Queens, midnight." Colton stood beside her, his face suddenly hardened with purpose. "She's not done. And she's not going alone." Emily folded the note, her eyes fierce.
"No,"
she said. "She isn't." The warehouse in Queens loomed like a forgotten giant, crouched in the shadow of the East River, its rusted frame creaking in the midnight wind. The sky above was thick with clouds, moonlight slipping between them like secrets. Emily stood at the entrance, her breath visible in the cold, the old pendant heavy against her chest. She could feel the memory of it all, pain, betrayal, survival pressing down on her as Colton stepped beside her, bandaged but resolute. They didn't speak as they pushed through the warped doors. Inside, shadows stretched long across cracked concrete. The air was damp, metallic. The kind of place where things were left to rot, dreams, lies, and maybe tonight, something else entirely. Sierra stood waiting in the center of the warehouse, her hair wild around her face, a knife gleaming in her hand. Behind her, Derek Vaughn leaned against a crate, his suit rumpled, his eyes burning with resentment. Sierra's lips curled into a twisted smile. "Look who came to say goodbye," she cooed. Emily didn't flinch. "This ends tonight." Sierra laughed. "You think you've won? You think this story ends with your fairy tale reunion? You stole everything from me?" I took back what you tried to erase, Emily said calmly. My name, my life, my truth. Sierra's knuckles whitened around the knife. I was almost her. I knew everything. His stories, his touch, his grief. I became Luna. He loved me. Colton stepped forward, voice cold. No, I loved an illusion, a ghost. You manipulated every word I gave you, every vulnerable moment I shared, and used it to hurt the one person I should have protected. Derek pushed off the crate. Enough of this, he growled. We're leaving. Let them chase ghosts while we disappear. But Sierra didn't move. Her eyes locked on Emily, wild and dangerous. If I can't have him, no one will. Then she lunged. Everything exploded at once. Shouts, movement, the gleam of steel. Colton shoved Emily aside just as Sierra slashed, the blade grazing his arm with a flash of blood. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed Sierra's wrist, twisting the knife from her grip. She screamed, fighting with the desperation of someone who had nothing left. Derek lunged at Emily, catching her by the shoulder, yanking her back with a bruising grip. But Emily, who had spent years surviving darkness, didn't falter. She drove her elbow into his ribs and twisted free, adrenaline turning fear into fury. You don't own me, she hissed, shoving him into a stack of crates that collapsed with a crash. Sierra broke free from Colton, scrambling for the knife again. Her eyes glittered with madness. I am Luna, she screamed. He promised me. But before she could strike, the warehouse doors burst open. Arthur Monroe stormed in, flanked by a private security team. Their weapons gleamed under the flickering overhead lights. Drop it, Arthur commanded, his voice like thunder. Sierra froze. The knife slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. Guards surged forward, seizing both her and Derek before they could make another move. Arthur rushed to Emily's side, pulling her into his arms. You're safe, he murmured, his voice cracking. You're safe, Emily. Colton, bleeding but steady, dropped to his knees in front of her. His eyes, once distant and cold, were now full of something raw, something real. I was blind, he said, voice hoarse. Not the way you were, but worse. I couldn't see what was right in front of me. I let you be hurt. I lost our child. I lost you, but I know who you are now. You're Luna. You're Emily. You're Emily. You're Emily. You're Emily. You're Emily. You're everything I want to remember. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a small, battered sun pendant, the twin to her moon. I kept it all these years. I swore I'd find you, and I did. Emily knelt before him, her hand trembling as she touched the pendant, her breath caught, her heart aching with the flood of memories, the lake, the promise, the boy, with the crooked smile. Jackie, she whispered, the name slipping from her lips like a forgotten song. Colton looked up, tears streaming down his face. It was always you. She hesitated, the weight of pain and love warring inside her. Then, slowly, she reached into her coat, pulled out the torn divorce papers she'd carried in her purse for weeks, and let them fall. We start over, she said. As the guards led Sierra and Derek away, their screams fading into the night, Emily took Colton's hand beneath the starlit sky. The past no longer chained her. The darkness was behind them, and before them stood a future reborn not perfect, but real. Together, they stepped out of the warehouse, into the cold air and toward something new, a promise once broken, now whole again beneath the moon. Life often unfolds in unexpected, painful ways, but the most powerful stories are born from resilience. Emily's journey reminds us that even when we are abandoned, betrayed, or unseen, our worth never diminishes. She was sold, silenced, and stripped of her past, but she refused to be defined by darkness. Instead, she turned her pain into purpose. Her strength didn't come from wealth or power, but from the courage to reclaim her identity, the grace to forgive, and the wisdom to see through deception. Colton's redemption teaches us another lesson. It's never too late to see the truth. Sometimes, we're so blinded by grief, guilt, or pride that we ignore the people who matter most. But healing begins when we take accountability and fight for what's right, even when it means facing our own failures. The necklace, those two simple pendants, symbolized a bond unbroken by time, distance, or lies. In the end, love didn't save Emily. She saved herself, and by doing so, she lit a path for others to follow. Let this be your reminder. You are not your past. You are not your pain. And even in your most invisible moments, you are becoming something stronger. If this story moved you, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this one. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter of courage, redemption, and truth. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest light comes after the darkest night.